Hello, welcome to episode 17 of Anglican Unscripted, a show where two gentlemen bloviate about Anglicanism. And until last week, we were just two guys with webcams and didn't do much, but now we're the latest Anglican sensation. I'm Kevin Carlson.
And I'm George Conger, and today is November 7th, 2011.
Okay, George, before we go on to our first story, let's discuss the rules of journalism.
There are rules?
There are rules. In case you weren't paying attention to the news today, Herman Cain is handing out a little pamphlet on the ethics of journalism to everybody who wants to report on his sex stories. And it's kind of neat because there are kind of some rules that have been created not by journalists, but by the things they report on. Okay, the first rule of journalism is first reports are never correct. Great example is 9/11. The first report was that a small twin-engine plane had run into the North Tower. That was incorrect. So that is a standard rule. The first reports you hear from a situation anywhere are incorrect. The second rule of journalism, and every reporter knows it, do not be the story. And what would be the third rule?
It's the Elvis Presley rule, which is don't be cruel, don't be mean, don't be evil, don't be malicious in trying to tear down or break somebody apart. See, journalism is not a form of warfare. It is the truth. And what we are about is bringing the truth of the Anglican world to as many people as we can through the medium of video.
Yeah, it's an amazing opportunity we have, and we report on all stories. Sometimes we report outside Anglicanism, and one of the things we do when we report stories is we wait until we have multiple sources before we step into a story, and that's something we're going to talk about in our next segment. Dun 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 dun. Breaking segment. Dun 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 dun. Now, as journalists, it's also important that people know who we are. My name is Kevin Carlson. I run a couple businesses, and I also run a ministry called AnglicanTV. I'm an Anglican layperson. I hold no collar. I'm not a canon. I've been laid hands on and received by a bishop in Alabama into the Episcopal Church. I was then received into the Anglican Church when the tech thing didn't go so well. My job with Anglican TV is to document the replanting of the Anglican Church in America. It's happening while we're sitting here. It's an amazing event to behold. George, who are you?
Who am I? I am George Conger. As you can see by this charming outfit I'm wearing, I'm an Episcopal priest. I was ordained to the ministry by a man named Robert Duncan. I was made an honorary canon of the Diocese of Dallas by Jim Stanton in 1998. And since 2000, I've been a priest of the Diocese of Central Florida, where I've held ministries as a parish rector and as a hospital and a hospice chaplain. And also for the past 12, 14, 15 years, I've been a journalist covering the church world. And through publications like the Church of England newspaper and the Living Church and Christianity Today, and so on and so on and so on, I've written about 4,000 stories over the years focusing on religion.
It would be fair to say you and I have covered the Anglican beat for quite a while.
Yeah, we're sort of old, we're the old crotchety people you see in the back making funny faces at press conferences.
That's right. We've heard it all before. George, our first story is about Anglican Unscripted.
Yeah,
I know. What happened?
The horror.
I know. We just violated rule number 2. Okay. somehow we got ourselves involved in a story by reporting a story. It happens from time to time where reporters get involved in the story, and it happened to us. We reported last week, and I'm going to break the tape here. We've had several sources contact us about some stuff going on in Pawleys Island. Apparently there's some discord going on between the Church of Rwanda and Bishop Murphy, where they're coming to some terms of separation. Bishop Murphy has decided that he wants to support women's ordination and that he wants to be able to appoint his own bishops without Rwanda having the ability to nix any of his decisions. And you know, this is something brand new and exclusive to us, but that could be very troubling.
Yes, and that the how it's working out is it looks like the AMIA is going to pull out from Rwanda and either seek another primate from another Global South church, or maybe ask retired Archbishop Emmanuel Collini to lead them, or maybe another option we really haven't thought of.
Kate, we just came back from tape, and as you can see, we reported on Nigeria and EMEA. And we didn't take any individual to task. We discussed what was happening in Pawleys Island. You and I had heard reports early on from what we thought was just a disgruntled person within EMEA, and we ignored it. Because what's the first rule?
It's wrong.
Yep, first report's always wrong. If one person from ACNA or EMEA approaches us and sends out this really nasty gram about what's going on, we think it's a disgruntled person. When 5, 6, 7 bishops, clergy, lay people of all sites and sources start to contact us, well, there's a story here that we need to look into. And part of being a journalist, we know that before you do anything, you contact that organization. And that's something you did. Tell us how that worked.
Well, on Tuesday, October 25th, I believe, I telephoned the press officer of the Anglican Mission in America, and I said that I had been hearing from a number of sources that there was a meeting in Pawleys Island that was discussing reorganizing the AMIA, and I had heard that the AMIA might pull out from Rwanda. I had heard something about there being some friction over episcopal appointments and over the relationship between the two churches, and I wanted to know what was going on. And the press officer responded there was no meeting whatsoever. No meeting was taking place. Perhaps I'd heard about a meeting in Little Rock that dealt with pastoral issues, but she had no knowledge of any meeting. And there was, as far as she knew, there was no friction or break or rift or anything like that with Rwanda. But she'd get back to me. And then we continued to receive detailed information about
Pawleys Island.
Pawleys Island.
All right. And that's the interesting thing is we do want to be sure that we get both sides of the story up because every story has two sides to a certain extent. They have two viewpoints, maybe not two sides. But, you know, we contacted EMEA and said, what's going on? And they said, nothing is going on. There's nothing to see here.
And on October 28th, I followed up with an email saying, this is what I'm hearing. Could you get back to me? Nobody had ever got back to me until after our tape was shown. And on November 4th, about 1 a.m. in the morning, a press statement was put out that took us to task over our broadcast.
Okay. And now we have to discuss Unscripted. Anglican Unscripted is two gentlemen who sit down with a basic outline of this week's stories. You and I sit down for about an hour before we start taping and discuss what do you want to talk about, what's important about this, what's not important about this, is this really interesting, what's not interesting. And unscripted means we don't have a script in front of us that is completely factual and precise the way some people are looking for. Let's talk about the difference between accuracy and precision. Accuracy is to say that, and this is accurate, 2 weeks ago the Dow Jones rose 250 points. That's accurate. Precise is the Dow Jones rose 250.17 points. Both are right, correct, true, factual, but one is precise and one is actual and factual. So we need to understand that Anglican Unscripted as a show is presented in a factual, unscripted, and accurate, but not precise manner. You and I get things wrong. Well, okay, I don't get things wrong. You get something. What did you get wrong? You got something wrong.
Oh, yes. The one issue that was raised was that I misstated the reason why Christ Church in Plano, Texas withdrew from the AMIA. Now, let me give you a little background. We were discussing the gracious way in which the AMIA has treated congregations that wish to leave. And I said that I remember when Christ Church Plano left the AMIA and went over to the ACNA, and it was done very well. Everybody was very pleased about how it took place. And then I added, and I think they left because of the women's ordinations issue. Well, the rector of Christ Church Plano contacted me, David Roseberry, and said, no, that's not why we left. And that was a mistake on my part. I should have stopped talking at a certain point. But you know, the other issues that we raised, the friction, the meeting, the reorganization underway or being discussed, they were all dead on. And now we're getting the details.
We're getting the details. We had details going forward, but they were always they weren't anonymous. They were presented to us from people who you and I know, and people that, are verifiable people, but they all say, this is what's happening, don't use our name. Because there's consequences, and that is a problem when your organization has people who fear stepping out because of insubordination or they'll lose their job. When I'm getting email after email saying, this is given a narrative of what's happening, and they were all spot on, they knew what was going on, saying this is really big news, we are leaving Rwanda.
And also there's a difference between a print report and an audio discussion of the issues. I did not write an article for the Church of England newspaper on the Rwanda issue because I had a problem. I had the press officer of the AMIA making a categorical denial of all these things. And then I had all this other information that couldn't be reconciled. And I wanted to get a little bit more before I went forward. And I had to use my judgment as to where did the truth lie in these conflicting statements. Now, I felt comfortable in talking about this on a video, but I wouldn't, in a press newspaper situation, put down, because in newspaper you have the luxury of stopping, looking at what you've done, and being precise.
Yes.
Where when you're unscripted, you don't.
No, we don't. And yet, we were, for all intents and purposes, fully accurate. And therein lies the bigger problem. What happens is when you have, I don't want to say overreaction, but EMEA reacted to what we put out.
Yeah. We contacted them on the 25th and the 28th, and our show went out on November, was it 2nd or 3rd?
Well, there was a snowstorm. It's supposed to go out every Monday morning. It's my great desire, but we couldn't, because there's no electricity, we couldn't did we record it Tuesday?
Tuesday, that's right.
Yeah, we recorded it Tuesday. I was finally able to get it up late Wednesday night, so most of the world was watching it Thursday, which is way late.
And on Thursday, the AMIA put out a response taking issue with our story, and we got a statement in response to our broadcast from some clergy in the Washington, D.C. area.
Yeah, and they had kind of written it for their own vestries and stuff like that. I guess it was designed to be an internal document. People have accused them of providing that as source material for our story, and I'm sad to say that we did not have any access to I guess we're calling it the Washington Statement. We had plenty of sources, and we had everything that they said in that Washington Statement was verified by other people with information before their document came out. Now, their document is the only one's public, and we're not going to make public the emails where people ask not to be identified. But their information is just as accurate as what's found in the Washington document. That is one of the hard things about being a Christian reporter, is using anonymous sources. You and I know who they are, but they are afraid for their jobs to go public. And we have to kind of, in a way, step between these things to say, this is news. Mia restructuring and leaving Rwanda, that is news. Okay, am I wrong?
No, you're not wrong, but what has happened is that the response to that news has now overtaken the news itself in many aspects.
Sure.
I'd like to contrast the responses we received from ACNA over the Nigeria story against the AMIA and the Rwanda story.
Right.
And I went into print on the Nigeria story, which in a nutshell was that there was friction between ACNA and the Church of Nigeria over the creation of a new Nigerian diocese in the U.S. on a cultural, ethnic basis. And I got responses from the Archbishop, Robert Duncan's press officer, who took exception to one or two points. They don't like the designation that I used. And they also said that Archbishop Oko and Archbishop Duncan have met, and things are going okay. In other words, they responded saying, okay, here are the two issues we take exception to, but they didn't attack as if I were an enemy. See, journalists are not Amalekites to be smoked hip and thigh. We're out here, that's from the Bible. For our Episcopal viewers, that's from the Bible. It's in the Old Testament.
Old Testament, yes.
It's that stuff in the front of the Bible. We're not Amalekites. We're out here to do a job, and we have a servant, and we report to somebody, and that's Jesus Christ, because we are servants of the truth.
Yeah. In the end of the day, I represent Jesus. And, if I get up here and I say a lie, I'm accountable to my bishop, my priest, and my Lord. And either one is more than willing to hold me accountable on that. And that's something where really we need to bring out here is the accountability. It is our understanding that one of the reasons Amia wants to leave Rwanda is an accountability, or I guess the word is reverse colonialism. And that's kind of a problem in a Christian structure. And I guess they no longer want to be a mission, but they want to be a missionary society. And when you take yourself out of accountability, especially in Anglicanism, you're going to run and stumble in lots of different meshes. And that's what all these emails we got said, what's going on here? We have no accountability for our money. We have no accountability for who we're choosing for bishops. We have no accountability to our primate, Bishop Murphy. And all they want to do is change the rules rather than address the accountability. And once again, if I'm wrong, you have an opportunity with Anglican Unscripted to correct us. It's probably not best to blast out an email press release, but contact George and I via email or via Skype, and we'll discuss these things. But we were presented with so much documentation, we had no choice but to report on it.
And we had verified this documentation.
Yeah, we have. And it's a situation we didn't want to be in the news. We never want to be part of the story. We want to report the stories. And Unscripted is Unscripted. I am Kevin, you are George, and news is news, and we're not doing this to take down an organization or to attack an organization, because just as much as you thought this could have been critical, you could have come back and with a release and made it a very positive statement that yes, of course we're going to restructure. Things are changing in Anglicanism all the time, and it's important that we find our church the most valid and viable way to serve Jesus. That's not the way you responded, and the people in EMEA have the ability to respond correctly. Everybody I know there has that ability, and it didn't happen.
And where it stands right now is that they put out a statement accusing people of being essentially satanic for bringing up these issues, that we're agents of the evil one. And frankly, that's silly.
It's silly, but that is, I don't know if you ever follow Scientology and stuff like that, but that's what the Scientologists do when people bring up a story about them. You can't mention Scientology in a news article without being called satanic. You know, it's a sad place where you shoot the messenger. And George and I'll get over it, and let's let this be gone, and let's go forward. And on to our next news story.
Which is Tom Cruise, right?
Yeah, Tom Cruise is next, yes. Okay, George, we're going to move on to news that's not about us. It's, thank God. This news is about three gentlemen who wrote down and narrated what happened in Pawleys Island. They put down who was there, what was talked about, and they also wrote down prescriptions for what they thought this would lead to and prescriptions for what they thought could be done to avoid what this was leading to. Their big concern was the presentation Bishop Murphy and Ken and Kevin Donlin made about a new structure. Tell us a little bit about this new structure they're talking about.
Well, according to this document, the AMIA is in the process of moving out from under the oversight of the Archbishop of Rwanda, being a missionary jurisdiction of that province, into being a freestanding religious order. Think of the Jesuits is the example that was offered.
All right.
And part of this movement out was done, according to the document, in reaction to concerns about the oversight and accountability between Rwanda and the AMIA. The Rwandan House of Bishops wanted to have greater say over the day-to-day operations of the AMIA, and Bishop Murphy said that that was reverse colonialism and terrible ecclesiology, and we need to have the AMIA not be under the thumb of the Rwandan church.
Right. Now, accountability is a basic principle in Christianity. Most of the organizations and societies in Christianity have it built into it. We have accountability in ACNA. There was accountability in tech. It was just never used. But accountability and being accountable to someone is what keeps Christianity safe from being abused. And that is kind of my concern when I read some of this, is it looks more like a consolidation, in my humble opinion, of power. That somebody does not, somebody wants to have a little bit of oversight of what you're doing, because for the last 12 years you've proclaimed to be a province and a mission of Rwanda in America. You need to reflect our values, our Rwanda values, while you're doing what you're doing. Part of our Rwanda values are accountability and having our oversight if you're going to use our name.
Yeah.
And
the group of the three clergy are part of the Renew DC network, which is one of the mission networks of the Anglican Mission in America under the oversight of Bishop Terrell Glenn. And these three clergy are saying that this, which is a work in process, it's not a done deal.
Right.
They're saying we have problems with it being an un-Anglican consolidation of power into the hands of one person. The idea of the synodical government of the church, where the lay people and the clergy have as strong a role as the bishops, is absent from this religious order structure at this time. It may not work out that way, but right now it's a top-down structure that consolidates all power, all authority, all information, all good in the people at the very, very top.
Right. Which is one of the problems we had when this story developed, was everybody who wrote to us said, don't use our name. This is what's going on. They identified who they were. They had no problem saying, I am so-and-so from so-and-so, Reverend here or Bishop here, but please don't identify me when you talk about the story, because I will be held accountable for insubordination. And there is that fear factor that really should not exist, because the people who are accountable seem to be at the lower levels. The bishops who contacted us are accountable to somebody. the clergy who contacted us are also accountable with their jobs. And
The message that these fellows said was being given was that, take the issue of women's ordination. The AMIA is now going to have a two-track system. Some women priests and some people who don't like women priests. If you don't like the fact that they're going to be women priests, you're free to go, is the message that's being given. But we're going to have women priests. So it's changing. And that, whatever your point of view as to was this a change or this is not a change, the message that is being given to people who believe in a traditional structure is, move on, folks, if you can't stomach it.
Right. So, obviously this is an evolving story. Obviously, you and I want other viewpoints as to what happened in Polly's Island or the restructuring of AMIA. We would like to be to present all sides if they're available to us. It's wonderful that this Washington statement came out. I wish we had it before our previous recording with episode 16. We could have been more precise. Accurate is obviously not always good enough, but we did not have access to it, and that was kind of sad. But things when your church or your society is changing, you can make it good news, and be open about it.
And I'd just like to take, what is the big picture in all of this?
Sure.
As in my impression, and this is my understanding, the AMIA, if it follows in the trajectory that has been outlined in this Washington statement, it is not going to be Anglican in a few years. Right. It's going to be breaking with the province that has tied it into the Anglican Communion. It's adopting a Catholic structure, and it is adopting a very closed, leader-driven organization. Now, they're perfectly free to do that. Mm-hmm. But if it was set out to be a renewal of Anglicanism in the United States, the only thing one of the points that was raised in the Washington paper, which struck me very, very strongly, was that natural law has been elevated to the same level as Scripture.
Sure.
That's a very Roman Catholic understanding of how truth is laid out. Yeah. And frankly, if the AMIA, if that's how they think, they're not evangelicals anymore. If that's how their structures and doctrine works, they're on their way out.
Let's hope.
I don't know if their members know that.
My prayer is that never makes it to the final. That at step 10 that's not there. Scripture trumps. It's common. Study a little bit more Anglican history. But, here's what George and I want to be, further down the road, and that's in open communication with everybody. Yeah, some people are going to be mad at us. We have to live with that. There are people at Tech that are always mad at us, and but it doesn't help to overreact to our stories as much as we can still help you present your side of the story. We love you guys. We've worked with you all in the past, and from George and I's standpoint, there's no hard feelings. Not because we've been proven right by documentation and stuff like that, but because we know the nature of how stories develop and how you want to protect your side of the story. Well, the best way to protect your side of the story is to tell your side of the story. And that's journalism point number 4. Welcome. I got Alan Haley on Skype, and you're not going to believe it, but we have more legal news. It's something that never seems to end, which is actually good for you. It's job security. For the rest of us, it's just interesting to follow. Now, we have a church here, which is one of the original Connecticut 6 churches called St. Paul's Darien. It's a famous church. They're part of the Darien Miracle. A book has been written about them and stuff like that. And they're going to try a completely unique approach in their legal ease, and I'm going to just set this up. They've decided to stay in the Episcopal Church. Wow. Okay. But they want a judge to decide who owns the property. Now, in all the other cases, people have left and gone to the Southern Cone, or they've gone to ACNA or EMEA, and then they've sued to keep their property. What is different about this, and is it a sensible strategy?
Well, okay, let's first place it in context in Connecticut, because just about 5 weeks ago, there was a decision from the Connecticut Supreme Court involving another of the Connecticut's 6 churches, Bishop Seabury in Groton, and Ronald Gauss, its rector. And they upheld the Dennis Canon. Of course, that parish had decided to leave, and voted to leave, and then was sued by the Diocese of Connecticut. So this now is a final decision by the Connecticut Supreme Court saying that the Dennis Canon trumped everything, and the property, when they tried to leave, then reverted to the diocese and the Episcopal Church. So that's what anybody in Connecticut has to try to deal with. And St. Paul's approach is unique and very innovative in that because they are not going to leave the Episcopal Church as their first step, they do not trigger the Dennis Canon. The Dennis Canon is this crazy last-minute piece of legislation rushed through General Convention in 1979, and the records of its passage are incomplete. Nobody can prove it actually passed. And yet the way it worded, it sets up a trust. But you know, ordinarily a trust, there's the settlor of the trust, there's the trustee of the trust, and then there's the beneficiaries for whom the trust is operated. So you have 3 parties: the settlor, the trustee, and the beneficiary. Well, in all the Dennis Canon names is a beneficiary. It says the beneficiary of this trust is the diocese of the church, where the church is located. It does, and it says that for the trustee, it says, well, that's the parish itself. Well, that's the owner of the property, the supposed settlor. And so you don't usually have someone who is both a trustee and an owner filling the same roles, because the Dennis Canon expressly says, for example, that they can deal with their property just like an owner as long as they remain in the Episcopal Church. Nobody can touch them. For example, they can spend all their money. Nobody can stop them from spending all the money as long as it's spent on church purposes. So,
they can donate to Anglican TV and not have to worry about anything.
That's right.
I'm liking this. I'm liking this a lot.
There you go. It's a program. And the point is, as long as they're in the Episcopal Church, nobody can say anything about how they're doing things and using their property or spelling it. If they have to get a mortgage or something, then they have to go get the permission of the standing committee and the bishop to the terms of the mortgage and so on. But apart from a few restrictions like that, the Dennis Canon leaves everyone pretty much alone, and it only kicks in when a parish decides to leave. So if St. Paul's never votes to leave, it can go into court, ask for a declaratory judgment that there is no current trust interest on its property, that's the owner free and clear of its property. And we'll see what the court has to deal with that, because, as I say, the Dennis Canon doesn't come into play.
Now, an interesting event occurred at St. Paul's last Saturday. They had invited an ACNA bishop, Bishop Murdoch, to come down and perform installing priests and deacons into the ministry in ACNA.
Yes.
And what's interesting about that is the Bishop of St. Paul's Darien is Bishop Ian Douglas.
Right.
To invite an outside bishop who, as far as Ian Douglas is concerned, is a non-Anglican bishop to perform a rite where Bishop Murdoch, as people are watching the B-roll, he processed in behind the gospel. He set his garments onto the altar, declaring ownership of that altar. He kisses the altar, as you're watching right now. That is a bishop declaring ownership of this altar. So he then sits in the bishop's chair and he lays hands on these ordinands.
Right.
What's going on there?
Well, it sounds to me as though the premises are being used for ACNA, being let out for ACNA to be used for ACNA purposes, because I take it the 3 people being ordained were received into ACNA, correct?
That is correct, yes.
Yeah, so, and I assume that the Reverend, was it Creighton?
Reverend Chris Layton.
Chris Layton, that's right.
Christopher, yep.
St. Paul's, did not take part in the actual ceremony or the laying on of hands.
Yeah, you have to watch the tape, but I did not see that part. And he contacted Bishop Ian Douglas and told him what was happening.
That's right.
He sought permission. He did not, I'm assuming, expect permission. Ian Douglas gave permission, and he called this Episcopal hospitality.
Very nice.
Okay, now my question to my favorite lawyer in the whole world is: does this set precedents?
It sets a great precedent for how the relationship should be between ACNA and the Episcopal Church, and I commend Bishop Douglas for his brotherly spirit in that regard, and to allow this to go forward in this spirit, because it's the antithesis of the attitude of Bishop Catherine Jefferts Schori, the presiding bishop, and her chancellor, who see ACNA as in, quote, competition with the Episcopal Church. And these are two groups that used to formerly be under one umbrella. It's impossible for them to be in competition at the same time and honor their common heritage. So I just, I fight that competition idea. The idea of a church in competition with some other church is total anti-Christian as far as I'm concerned.
No, it is. It is.
You're concerned with the gospel message of Jesus Christ, or you're not. And whoever gets it best across and most clearly across is going to have more parishioners than the other, but it's not a competition.
No, not at all.
Because nobody wins unless we all win, unless we're all saved. And so
that is very wise advice from a lawyer.
Well, thank you. But it's something that I've gained over, 60 years plus in the Episcopal Church, and watching the course of events go and reading, I was thinking back to when I was in college. I dated someone who is now an Episcopal priest. Her father was an Episcopal priest. And when I visited his home and I went to his rectory, heard his sermons. This man had been ordained in the early years of the 20th century. And he was a stellar Christian clergyman. His message was right on point, always to his congregation, always taking care of them. His wife was a saint. And this is the model that I grew up in with the Episcopal Church. And it's departed so far that it's a tragedy in my view.
No, in my view too. But, in the end, Christ wins. We just have to make sure it's not messy before he wins. And,
right. So I assume they've got good legal help and good legal advices. They're going to, as I say, have to walk under the shadow of that Connecticut Supreme Court ruling.
Yeah.
But, as long as they can keep the Dennis canon at bay, then
it's a win-win situation without the Dennis canon. Right. Alan, again, I want to thank you for your time, and thanks to St. Paul's Darien, I'll be talking to you very soon.
Okay, very good.
God bless. I have on the other line, via the magic of Skype, Jeff Walton from the IRD. He's the communications director. He serves many different functions there, and I actually run into him from time to time when I attend Anglican events around the country. And he recently published an article which kind of discusses and rediscovers some of the numbers in the declining church we call tech. I kind of wanted to talk to you quickly, Jeff, about your report that you put out this week. I noticed that all churches are in decline right now, but specifically we're seeing large numbers of 4 and 5, 6% from the Episcopal Church. What precipitates the falling numbers in the overall church, and why is tech kind of leading the pack?
Well, I should say all mainline churches are in a state of decline right now. However, not all churches are. For example, the Assemblies of God is an example of a denomination in the United States that's growing. But the Episcopal Church doesn't consider the Assemblies of God as part of its peer group. It looks at itself in relation to the United Methodist Church, the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, the groups that have been in the country since its founding. And what's happened is the rate of decline within the Episcopal Church seems to be at the steepest end of decline amongst all 7 of those mainline churches. The United Methodist Church right now is declining just under about 1% a year, and the Episcopal Church decline seems to be between 3 and 4%, depending on if you're talking about membership or attendance. That places it among the steepest declining churches in the United States right now.
Which is, it's amazing because they do put a lot of resources into international missions, and they count themselves with 16 other dioceses around the world. Some in countries where other churches are growing very, very quickly, specifically Guyana, Sudan, and other places where you're seeing a rapid growth in church. What seems to be their difficulty in grasping a growing strategy?
Well, I point to several different areas where the Episcopal Church has struggled. One of those is due to a decrease in baptisms. When we look at Global South churches that are growing, they tend to be baptizing a lot of people. This is due to two things. One is they procreate more, so they have more children that they bring into the church. And another reason is that they do evangelism, so they have a lot more adult baptisms than the Episcopal Church does. And the lack of baptisms in the Episcopal Church, which has seen a very steep drop over the last generation, has resulted in a numerical decline because the church is statistically getting older, and as people die off, they are not being replaced. So that's a big key reason that you see a difference between Global South church growth and North American church decline in the Anglican context.
Is part of the problem that the Episcopal Church has a different theology than the rest of the Anglican Communion? I noticed that the Global South is growing rapidly, and even an entity here in America called the Anglican Church in North America, the ACNA, is really growing and adding churches on a weekly basis.
Yes, and that's one of the reasons that I mentioned adult baptism. There has been an issue with the U.S.-based Episcopal Church and its seminaries for many years, where the students that have come in have been instructed in a universalist theology. This theology teaches that everyone is either already saved or, in certain extreme circumstances, that there is no sin that people need to be saved from. As a consequence, this reduces the urgency of evangelism because you're not after winning souls. In the Global South, this salvific theology of practicing the Great Commission, going out and making disciples because you care about people's eternal security, adds an incentive for people to act. And it makes people take risks relationally, economically, in order to advance their faith. So we've really seen a strong difference between the Global South and Global North churches on this issue. Although certainly it varies body to body. There are definitely parts of the Episcopal Church that are evangelistically vibrant. And as you mentioned, the Anglican Church in North America would certainly be considered vibrant in its evangelistic practices.
Another question I would have then is, based on all the research you've done, is there anything that the Episcopal Church can do to reverse its decline?
I actually think that there's a number of things that the Episcopal Church can do to reverse its decline. However, I'm skeptical that they're going to take part in those initiatives. I'm actually just talking today with a lay leader from an Episcopal church in Arkansas who posted my article on the church's Facebook page and promptly received a call of concern from his priest about it. And it led to a discussion about what could be done within their own parish to avoid some of these issues that are taking place in the national church. For example, the Episcopal Church seems to have resigned itself to being a small boutique church that caters to a white, upper class, I would say politically liberal category. And that's really limiting itself compared to the broader spectrum of what's in the United States. One of the things that I suggested in this particular parish's situation is they could start doing things like saying, what do young families need in order to be ministered to?
Sure.
Well, they need children's ministries and a youth education program. Is your church offering that? A lot of Episcopal churches are very old right now in their average age. You'll see people in the pews who are in their 60s and 70s, and oftentimes there aren't many children. And I think that's a self-reinforcing issue where, there's no children, so therefore there's no children's program. And as a result, there aren't going to be families that are going to be coming and keeping the church young. Another issue too was I talked about the absence of relational evangelism within the Episcopal Church. One of my suggestions to this man was that he could consider the church adopting a sort of relational evangelism program such as the Alpha Course.
Sure.
These are all basic sort of cornerstones of different evangelical churches within the Episcopal Church for bringing in younger families, sharing Christ with friends and neighbors in a way that's not intimidating. And really, these are basic things that the Episcopal Church could do, but that it's not doing. I'm not of the position that God has left the Episcopal Church. I think God is very active in the Episcopal Church. And certainly he used the Episcopal Church to prepare my heart to accept Christ.
Jeff, I want to thank you for your time. I certainly look forward to future interviews we can do about the Episcopal Church and just about the mission of the church in general. I think you offered a wonderful perspective, and I read your stuff all the time, and I'm a big fan of IRD. I want to thank you again for your time.
Sure. Thanks for speaking with me, Kevin.
No problem. Our third story this week is actually a sad story. We're finding more and more violence right now in Nigeria. Today, there are gun battles going on in northern parts of Nigeria where militant Islamists are killing Christians with machine guns in the streets. And, you know, it's a sad story that this is continuing to happen.
Yes, the BBC is reporting that 65 people have been killed by the Boko Haram militia, which is an extremist Muslim group in the north of Nigeria. And Boko Haram, in the local language, essentially means Western education is bad, haram, evil.
Yeah, evil. We've heard that evil already. But, you know, this is one of the biggest struggles Christianity is going to find over the next many years is the struggle against militant Islamists. And I know that Cana is doing wonderful work in teaching about Islam and using Islam to teach about Jesus. And we have wonderful work within Anglicanism right now of trying to work with Muslims who will listen to us and work with us. It's my hope that one day there's no longer violence between those who hate us.
The past few weeks have seen a remarkable upsurge in its militant Islamic news. Just off the top of my head, we had the president of the Sudan, Omar al-Bashir, say that my country is now going to be governed by Sharia law. There are 1 million Christians in northern Sudan who are either going to have to convert, be second-class citizens under legal discrimination, or get out of the country.
Yeah.
In France, there's a satirical magazine called Charlie Hebdo, and it's sort of like an adult National Lampoon or Mad magazine. Right. They publish a cartoon of Muhammad on their cover, saying, if you don't like it, you'll get 100 lashes. It was a dumb cartoon. The day after it came out, the offices of the magazine were firebombed. And we have in London the Barnabas Fund, which has been working to warn people about the spread of militant Islam. They just were cleared by the Advertising Council in England of false advertising, because somebody charged them by putting out pamphlets that say Christianity is good, Islam is not the way, that they were guilty of false advertising. They were being harassed for preaching the gospel of Jesus Christ. Now, 65 dead here, a bombing in Paris, are not the same thing as harassment. But look at that poor fellow in Iran, Pastor Youssef, that we've talked about in the past.
Sure, Pastor Youssef. Latest reports are they're really trying to indoctrinate him, re-indoctrinate him to the Muslim faith, which he never was Muslim. He was born into the culture, but he never gave his life to Muhammad, who seems to be the character who is above reproach. And that's going to be a great difficulty because thank God he's in the news every day. That's keeping him alive. But you really need to pray for him because right now he's in the struggle. Do I, accept Islam in a public forum and save my life, or do I go forward and become a martyr in Iran and spark a Christian revolution like never before. So,
and you know that this poor fellow, as we've seen in Pakistan, and when we have these blasphemy trials, Christians may be arrested for blasphemy against Islam, and the courts may not get around to it or may not decide. But as soon as these people step out into the street, they're murdered by a mob.
yeah.
It's a really difficult time, and as you mentioned today in northern Nigeria, things are really heating up.
Yeah. George, we just went through a terrible snowstorm here in the Northeast in Connecticut. 800,000 people were without power for most of the week. It's very disorientating. It's very hard to be out of communication, to be out of power, light, and all the necessities that you and I have come up to understand as being part of the Western world. And I have a full new appreciation for the importance of communication. So when I say and put here on the bottom of the screen, wrong camera, AnglicanUnscripted@gmail.com, it's really an invitation for you to contact us. You can provide us with information, which you guys were gracious to do about Polly's Island. It's to provide us with critiques and criticisms and encouragement. But there's a lot more to that as well. George, tell them about that.
We need to hear from you both to understand how we're doing. And if nobody told me that Christ Church in Plano had not, women's ordination wasn't an issue for them, I would be continuing in my ignorance. You know, set us right when we're wrong, let us know what's happening, and help us help the Anglican communion keep that mirror, looking into that mirror so they can know thyself, know what's going on, and be able to be a better church for all of us.
Right. And let's talk a little bit about press releases and stuff like that. Before last week, you and I would reach probably about 6,000 to 7,000 people a week with our videos. Thanks to some recent publications by some other people, we're now at the range of about 12,000 to 15,000. And we have a growing audience. So those of you who do not know about Anglican Unscripted, I'm providing the link where you can watch all the previous Anglican Unscripteds here. This is episode 16. We started 16 episodes ago, talking when we met in Long Beach. George and I also travel a lot with Anglicanism. And so it's really been it provides you with a learning experience about the news in Anglicanism. Some of our shows are more funny than others. I provide outside video clips. We do hold people to task, and we also hold ourselves accountable. And we want to thank you for joining us this week. And
I'm George
Lord
Conger.
willing, yeah, you're George Conger. I'm Kevin Carlson. Lord willing, you'll see episode 18.